Let me apologize, I guess, for the temperature in the room here. For the first 2 years we were here, we had no air conditioning or heat, and so there was no control. And then we all got really excited when they decided that the compressor unit, they found a compressor to fit the unit, and we got air and heat, and now we have no thermostat though to control it. And so that's if you see the fog coming out of my mouth, you'll understand a little bit. It's tough game. I think our players, myself, after the game, were very emotional about it. I think that we kind of pride ourselves on not really worrying about the helmet logos or the venues, and just talk about playing football. And I was very proud of the way our team played, and obviously very disappointed for them in the loss. We certainly put ourselves in position, and need to continue to kind of learn how to finish. But I was really excited, I think, about a few things, and really disappointed, obviously, that we couldn't get out of there with a win. In relation to the excitement, I think that, as I mentioned last week, we've continuing to modify the offense. And I thought Pete Thomas did a really, really nice job of handling some things. He's continuing to grow in the offense. There were a couple of things that he missed, and there were some critical things, and that's kind of what happens for a quarterback. But and it just boils down to basically just having some experiences in it. But overall, I thought he played a really outstanding game, and we were able to possess the football, which we knew going in the game was going to be really critical, and we did it with the passing game instead of the run game, and so kind of pleased with the direction and that's headed. I think we're going to be able to continue to grow this week in relation to that from an offensive perspective. Knew that defense was going to be significantly challenged, as I mentioned last week. I thought it was the first time that we'd really seen a really dynamic passing team this year, and we were able to hold them in check and really limit their explosion plays. I thought that was going to be the really critical part of it. Their receivers were so good about being able to create explosions on their own, rather than necessarily throwing the ball down the field, is throwing a hitch and that guy being able to make a guy miss and turning it into a 20-yard play or a 60-yard play. And so overall, I thought our defense played really, really well. They got themselves off the field on third down, which was so critical, obviously, in relation to that, not just the offense possessing the ball, but our defense on third down was able to get themselves off the field. The kicking game was a little bit of a struggle. Justin obviously kicked another 51-yard field goal, which is making some differences in terms of his ability to be able to do that and the confidence that is derived from that. But we gave up a big punt return, and so we knew that the returners, we did everything that we could to try to kick the ball away from the returners, knowing that they returned on everybody and were dynamic along those lines. We had one that got away from us, and in the process, they made us pay. So, again, I was significantly proud of our players in relation to rebounding. I think one of the most difficult things about all of this is the fact that we knew going into the season there weren't going to be breaks. And especially I'm talking about the out-of-conference games in particular. Look at some other schedules and even Appalachian States in relation to that, and so consequently we have to get on that emotional high every week in order to have a good chance to win. And coming off a really difficult loss, obviously, to Texas State, and I was excited that our players rebounded the way they did, and anxious for them to continue to do that, obviously, because this was a difficult loss for us also. Moving into the Appalachian State game, I think that Scott's done a really nice job, I think, with the program, and a wonderful guy, a wonderful coach, and they're finding themselves right now offensively. They have made some transitions themselves and are really, really running the football tremendously effectively, going to more two tight end sets than maybe what they did early in the season, and it's paid dividends here for them. The last 3 games, I think they had over 500 in 2 of those games and over 600 actually in one of those games. And so they're putting up some points and they're putting up some yards. Defensively, this is a very unique defensive front that we're seeing. They're basing it out of an odd front, and again, outside of our defense, we don't necessarily see that very often. And they have a huge coverage rotation that they utilize that's different. It's a little bit more old school. I'm used to it because of when I grew up, but for our players, this will be a unique coverage spin for them. And so we've got some challenges there also. And then obviously we're going into, I think, a great environment. You look up there and you're seeing a packed stadium. They've got some new facilities, and so we're going into a hostile environment, and one where they showed that they kind of care about football there, and so they're going to be on us, obviously, because of where everybody's at within the conference. And so it should be a fun game from a standpoint of the crowd and how much they're into the game. So we're looking forward to another opportunity. Questions?
Obviously, you know your team the best, but I just was curious when I heard this in the broadcast what your thoughts on this were. They were saying that maybe you should have used Braley Brown in the red zone more because he's more mobile. So I just wanted to see your thoughts on that and what his role was in the red zone.
Well, I'm not familiar with the commentators on the broadcast, and you're right. Ultimately, I do know more of my football team a little bit more than – I don't know that I would say that Braley is more mobile than Pete. Actually, Pete's faster than Braley. And so Braley does bring some things to the table, which I don't disagree, and that's why he's involved in the game. And that because of some of his experiences with some things we've done in the past, he's seen some things rather than seeing it for the first time. He's seen it multiple times. And are you referring to the television broadcast?
Yeah.
That's interesting because the last time they commented, they didn't want me to play him at all, and now they want me to play him more. So I guess that I guess that's a no-win thing. I understand kind of we want to get Braley involved, and Braley made some plays, and proud of the fact that he was able to do that. And obviously the 2-quarterback system that we have utilized in the past and are utilizing some now creates some problems for the defense. It's a very unique thing that we're doing, and again, it's been interesting just the national media attention that comes kind of along with some of those things that you do because you are doing some things that are unique. But I don't know that I would agree with their assessment knowing my football team.
Coach, I think one of the big things that jumps out this weekend is the weather. Obviously, you can't really, scheme around that. What kind of things can you do to try to prepare for the cold and possibly wet, snowy weather?
I don't know, because again, it's the weather's the one thing that really is uncontrollable. We can practice situations, and we can practice, down and distance, vertical field. We can practice all the other things, and that's just something that you can't practice, and so you just don't make it a big deal. Our mantra again is always kind of put a ball down because of just some of the people that we play and the places that we play, and let's just put a ball down and play. And I think that kind of goes to weather too. That's one of those things that that's out of your control, and we're going to put a ball down on Saturday, and the good players are going to show up regardless. And so that's that's kind of what we take pride in, and so that's what we'll do moving forward.
First time to face Appalachian State, but not your first time to face Coach Satterfield as well as I think it's Coach Prance, the quarterback/offensive coordinator when they were at FIU. What similarities do you see as to what they were doing at FIU versus now?
Well, I think that early in the season there was tremendous similarities, and then as the season's progressed, again they've modified their offense effectively and utilized more tight ends in the mix and a little bit of deception in relation to where the ball is, which is becoming a little bit more in vogue right now with some of the things that Auburn has done offensively with their spread. And so people have copied and duplicated some of that, and they've certainly done some of that there.
How would you compare your just aggressiveness on fourth down comparison to what you've done in the past couple seasons?
Well, it's obviously not as aggressive. And that has, I think, a lot more to do with just a little bit more youth at some positions on offense. I think that one thing that I'm a math guy, okay, as the coaches will probably tell you. I play percentages, and some of those percentages are always wrapped around, what is the percentage chance of making the first down in relation to the points, and then at the same thing, is that worth the risk in terms of the 7 points to the 3 points? Because I think that's kind of what you're always kind of calculating. And if you don't make it, what's the field position how that's going to change? And then obviously you have to have some feel in relation to where you're at in the ball game, how much time's left, and some of that. So there's been time frames because of the nature of our kicking game to the nature of our offense that I was very, very aggressive on fourth down. I'm not quite as aggressive right now, partly because of the kicking game, because of the kicker, and partly because of the offense. But by nature, I always kind of talk to the players. I want to go out and try to win games, and they know that about me. That's what I want to try to do. That's why we're in the defensive structure that we're in. That's why we're in the offensive structure that we are in. And there's more the risk that's involved in that, but I'm not going to try to avoid losing. I want to go out and try to win games. And so we're always going to weigh the risk of that fourth down call. We obviously came up a little bit short on one this last week, but we converted two. And it's certainly, we've always been really good in red zone scoring touchdowns. This year we're not. And yet when you look at the national stats, we're a higher percentage right now than what we've ever been from a national rank in terms of red zone scoring. But we're kicking field goals instead. And that's kind of the difference right now. And we've got to find ways, I think, to be more effective in the red zone in terms of scoring touchdowns. And it's not necessarily the red zone, that plus 20 area. It's really the goal line that's really, I'm talking about the plus 10 and in, that has been a real sore spot for us in relation to being able to control the line of scrimmage more than anything else.
Coach, your team is still in the bowl picture, and I know y'all preach one game at a time, but does that come into conversation? Do y'all talk about that?
I don't think that I necessarily have to. I think that one of the difficult things right now, we need to have conversations about things that we know are out there. We don't need to, our focal point needs to be on the next game, and I think sometimes the advent of social media over the last 10 years has really changed the message that coaches have to deliver. There was a time frame when we had great control over the message. Now we have no control over the message. The only thing that we can do is try to frame the message differently and hope that your players are focused enough on the task at hand, because that's all that really, really matters. If you start looking too far in advance we all knew going into the season there was a chance for a bowl game because we had 12 games. And you need to win 6 to be bowl eligible. And so we knew that going into the season. And then after that, really, you need to kind of flush it and just really take it one game at a time. And I know that's coach speak. But the reason why it's coach speak, and you hear it year in and year out, is because it's true. That's why everybody speaks it, is because it's true. And we've got to just make sure that our players understand that. And I think they do. Everybody knows what's out there. But nothing's going to happen unless we take care of this game, and if our focal point's on that, then we stand a better chance of accomplishing some of our goals at the end. And that's when you're looking at whether you've attained goals is at the end of the season and not during it.
What do you think has made you guys so successful in getting sacks this season? I mean, obviously in the past you guys have had good defenses, but what do you think has made you even more successful in getting sacks this season?
I think we're better on defense than we've ever been. I think that's part of it. I think we have more athletes, and our athletes have actually grown up in this system. They've played a significant amount of football. I think that one of the things that's also happened to the majority of this group is they've had a chance to kind of grow up the right way. And when I say that, that doesn't mean that they've all started since they were redshirt freshmen. They were able to have good experiences in the process, and so thusly their confidence goes up. I think that obviously the nature of our defense requires that we have sacks, because if you're going to take as many risks as we do from a defensive perspective, then you better be getting to the quarterback. And then, so some of this I think goes to Coach Reffa and the defensive staff in relation to scheme. Some of it significant portion of this goes to the players that we currently have on defense. We've recruited to this type of defense now. I mean, speed and our numbers are right. But then I would also say that I think Coach Mumford has made a big difference. I think we're seeing more production out of our defensive line, and it's not always just in the stat line. Because I think that we're getting to edges and we're forcing some double teams that allow even the linebackers to get it, or the safeties or corners even, to get involved in some of the pressures. And so ultimately, everybody helps everyone else. And so I think Coach Mumford and the defensive line has done a great job with that group, and that group should produce at this point in time because they're older and more experienced also. So I think it's a comfort level of what we do in the defense. I think it's the nature of our defense, but most importantly, I think it's our players. I think we have good defensive football players.
On the same lines, it seems like it's just by nature for people to focus on how the offense is doing and the production over there, and the quarterback's always kind of in the spotlight.
Right.
And so a lot of times it seems like we're talking about, okay, you're happy with the offense this week, and they're coming around and then listening to like the teleconference yesterday, you got so many questions about this defense, and it seems that everyone is taking notice, nationwide, and it seems like so many questions that you get from the national media. So how proud are you of that side? Because I feel like I said, it's kind of like nature to talk about the offense, but just what they're accomplishing over there and some of the national stats they have.
Well, I'm significantly proud of that group. It wasn't unexpected either. I mean, this is not a surprise. I felt going into the season that this was our best defensive group. And it's not just the athleticism, it's their demeanor. It's the way that they kind of approach the game. And I think that, again, they've got some confidence. Regardless, I coach the quarterbacks because that's been my expertise. I want to do that. That's something that I didn't do at the other two places where I was a head coach, to where I might have been involved in the offense, I didn't coach a position, and I swore up and down I'm a coach. That's what I enjoy doing. But just because I'm on the offensive side doesn't mean that I don't appreciate great defense. I think the defensive coaches would tell you in particular, especially when we start talking about recruiting, you win right now. The formula for winning is that you play great defense. And you've heard me say this, you have a quality quarterback, and then you don't hurt yourself in special teams. And if you do that, you're going to win a lot of games. And I'm tasked more not with having great offenses. Our task is to win. And that's my job, is make sure these kids have that opportunity to do that. And if that's the formula, that's what we want to do. And so consequently, we've spent a significant amount of our recruiting scholarships on the defensive side since we've been here. And to make sure that defense was right and that it was growing up, and I think we've accomplished that. And we have some depth on defense right now because of some of those things that we've done. And quite honestly, there's a part of me that while again I've spent more time on the offensive side, I love great defense. I love it, and there's a part of me that says that I should have always been a defensive coach because I love that. I love that side of the football, and so I enjoy watching our guys play on both sides, inclusive of the defense. Which I know some people look at me, he's over there on offense all the time. Hey, listen, I get involved in some of the discussions that we have on defense going into the game, and I'm certainly involved on game day in relation to some of those discussions.
I talked with you after the game there at Texas A&M about Berry ball really being back. Now that you've had a chance to go back, digest it, look at the film, how much fun and how great was it to see that back out there?
Well, there's still some things that we've got to make some strides on, obviously, from an offensive perspective. We played a very athletic defensive group, and I like running the football. Okay, I like seeing, but I ultimately like throwing the ball better, and the nature of throwing the football, there is so many more challenges in throwing the football, I think, than running the football. Running the football is covering people up, getting a hat on a hat, here we go. And there's some fun about that. So much of the passing game requires design, and they do this, you do that, and there's so many complementary things in the passing game, and so ultimately I think it's just more fun because there's a bigger challenge to it, because as they modify their coverage and adjust and you set things up, then there's this big payday off of it, rather where in the run game sometimes that's not necessarily the case. And obviously we're going to continue in that mode, because ultimately I have a lot more fun with it, and so there's been a significant higher mandate along those lines.
Look at some of these stats. Does it surprise you that the top two teams of total offense right now are the two teams that have bumped up from FCS?
Well, no, I mean I think that both those staffs have done a very good job, and I don't want to take anything away from them. But I think, again, statistics are you can make statistics do anything that you want them to do, depending upon which stat that you want to pull out. And I'd kind of referred last week when Texas State put up 77. That's going to skew some of your stats. I think when you look at our out-of-conference games against Wake Forest and LSU and continue on Kentucky and Texas A&M, our out-of-conference games aren't the same as everyone else's. And so consequently your stats are going to become significantly skewed because they're playing against Campbell and we're playing against LSU. And there's a difference. Now, I'm not taking anything away from Appalachian State along those lines, but I think that, as coaches, we can't get caught up in statistics. Now, obviously, there's tendencies that become significant in relation to how much do they want to run the football, how much do they want to throw the football. But in relation to looking at these overall numbers and saying, okay, well, they're up here, well, you put 66 up on somebody, then, but we're not going to put 66 up on LSU.
Is this a different type of game because it's a new opponent, something maybe you have to feel out more? Does that really change anything? Or?
I think that is one of the interesting dynamics this year in the conference, is the fact that, there are some new teams, because I think there is a little bit of a comfort level, as long as the coaches stay in place anyway, that there is a little bit of comfort level in knowing your opponent, knowing the venues and all that. And for this year, that's new. Now, obviously, we're not going to see, we had a little bit of comfort level with South Alabama, for instance, and they're not on the schedule this year. I know Georgia Southern doesn't draw Lafayette or Arkansas State, and I think that's going to continue to probably skew some statistics too as we move into this kind of new era where everybody's not playing everybody, because you don't really have like entities playing against like entities. There's some newness to it, and which right now all of college football is kind of going through a little bit of some changes, and it's going to continue as we kind of move down the road. We're going to see even more changes.
What do you think of just the first part of the meetings for the playoff system and just the human element of that? Does that change anything versus the VCS?
Yeah, I don't know that anybody can. You knew there was going to be an uproar because that's what everybody wanted, right? I mean, if there's no uproar, then there's no talking points. If there's no talking points, then nobody's excited, and so you knew there were going to be some. I think that I'm not going to pass any judgment on the committee, and not that I have the right to, quite honestly, because they have. But I do think I know something about the game, and I do know something about the teams and the coaches and some of the the competition that's out there and what people are facing. But I think at the end of the year, that's when the group needs to be judged, because I think right now one of the things that I did appreciate out of the group. Because I think everybody was afraid that they were going to speculate. Well, if you look at the rest of this team's schedule, then they're going to win out. And so consequently, because they're going to win out in relation to maybe another team whose chances of winning out might be narrowed because of the competition, that everybody was going to go, well, I'm going to look really smart because I know that these guys are going to win out. And even though they might not want to be one of the best 4 teams currently based off the body of work, they will be at the end of the season because they will be undefeated. And I don't know that that's kind of what everybody's looking for. I know whenever I vote in the poll, I try to make sure that I don't look at schedules down the road in the coaches' poll. I base it off what I see right now as the body of work. And sometimes I have a 2-loss team ahead of a team that maybe hasn't lost a ball game because I do think that there is some differences in who people play. I know that's, again, I just look at our own schedule in relation to other people, and I go, yeah, there's some differences. And so I want to take those kind of things into account. And I think that the committee, I thought, really was quite brave in kind of what they did because it looked to me like that they took all their own biases and their own institutional hats off and said, based off of where we're at right now, here's the top 4 teams. And there's going to be arguments about whether that was accurate or not, but I did think that was I was a little bit surprised by that.
I know you've mentioned this before about the styles versus the style, like when we're talking about Texas State
Right.
and how many points they've been putting up, and then Lafayette holds them, and it's kind of depending on what type of team you're facing and what kind of style they play. You look at Appalachian State, who shut out Georgia State last week,
Right.
44-0, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct.
And then you have Georgia State, who Lafayette has to score in the last couple of minutes to end up winning the game. I mean, it just seems like that really, and I know we talk about this all the time, but it's like FCS school last year or a team that's been in the Sun Belt for years. It's just, you never really know what you're getting out of this type of team. And, just looking at some of the things about Appalachian State, especially with, changing out the quarterback, the guy who got something
Right.
we did is not there anymore. And so, what do you really focus on as far as, okay, don't just look at
Right.
who they beat and who they haven't.
Well, I think that, that's a huge trap in relation to trying to draw comparison scores. That's a huge trap. And I think that some of this has to do with, I think, as I mentioned last week, I think injuries for some people, not for some people, for everybody, at key positions based off what they do on offense and defense is much more dramatic now than what it was 10 years ago. Because the game has become so much more specialized than what it was 10 years ago. And so I think as you're kind of looking through why did this happen, a lot of it has to do with maybe a key injury. Some of it has to do with matchups, just like in basketball. This game has become much more matchup oriented than what it used to be. And so some of it is that style of play that is part of the matchup. I have no question, I don't know this for a fact, but just watching the video, part of it was that it was snowing sideways, and there was a lot of Georgia State guys that were all huddled next to that heater. And, and so going back to kind of what Dusty said earlier, I think that, there are some other things that, depending upon whether you want to use it or not, become distractions also. That style of play, and again, Texas State's numbers were skewed a little bit by the 77 points, and in relation to what they did against Lafayette or whatever, because there's there are differences between teams too, and then sometimes it's just about where everybody's at emotionally at that point in time in the season. You come off a tough loss, you come off a big win. Both of them can be really beneficial, or they can be really deterring too. I mean, to having success that week. So it's there's a lot of things kind of going on right now. Who would have thought Florida would beat Georgia, right? It's very, very hard to predict college football right now.
You kind of described your defense as a bend but don't break type.
Would I describe our defense as that?
No, you did. I think yesterday on the teleconference.
They were not a bend but don't break. Yeah.
Do you feel like that's your team as a whole, with having the 4-game losing streak, but being at a point where they're not going to break because of the way that their mindset is?
Well, for the most part, I don't look at other people's teams much and say, okay, this is where they're at emotionally, because of I think when you're dealing with 18 to 22 years olds, a lot of times there is no clue what they're thinking. Now, I deal with my team on a daily basis, and so I know how competitive our coaches are, and I think it starts with the coaches along those lines, and their willingness to get back up off the ground. And then I think that moves through the players, because I think they see that competitive spirit coming from the coaches. I think that one of the things that I think that we have now in relation to when we first got here is we have a relatively mature football team. They've seen some ups and downs in the past. And as I've said before in here, and the players know this, there is nothing that a great win doesn't cure. Okay, there's nothing. Great win cures everything. And that's what our focal point needs to be on, is playing great football. And if we play great football, then we'll have a chance to win. And that's the only way to get yourself out of a situation and dig yourself a hole, or keep a streak going when you're winning, is focus on the next game and focus on playing great football, and then everything else kind of takes care of itself.
You said you guys had an issue inside the 10-yard line in terms of red zone, not
Right.
20. So how do you avoid just pressing too much at that point versus improvement? Because obviously you're looking to look at it and say, here's what we want to fix, here's what we want to try. But how do you keep the players from thinking about it too much?
Well, I think that initially we thought that we could go down there and match up physically in the red zone. And that's kind of, the field shrinks. There's more bodies close to the football. And consequently, that's where you have to tend to be real physical. We haven't won those matchups. And so now we have to become more creative on offense. If we can't physically do the things that we're asking, then we can't keep beating our head up against the wall. That's not what we are. That's not what we do. We've proven that. And so we need to look outside of that. And that's kind of, there are other things. Initially, whenever we were struggling early on when I first got here with some of those same things, and you might recall at that point in time with Colton, we went into a heavy option phase down there. We became an option football team down inside that area, and we improved because of it. And so now, as coaches, we have to look at our total personnel and say, you know what, this experiment has not worked, and so consequently, you move to another direction. And obviously, that's. I think we have some things that we're working on right now that have been really good for us and is showing signs of improvement. And that is an area where we still obviously need some work.
Any other questions for Coach Berry?
Did you guys ever notice how Nick is just very conspicuously quiet during this time frame?
He's in deep thought.
Soaking it all in.
Soaking it all in.
Got an hour with me tomorrow.
That is a true hour with me tomorrow, which is hard, I know, on you, Nick.
Are you just going to